This session is entitled Design and Identities, and the three papers that we have today are actually all going to be speaking about design and national identity more specifically. So I think this should be I think this should be a very interesting assortment. Our first speaker will be Ertug Altinay. Ertug Altinay is a doctoral candidate in the Department of Performance Studies at New York University. No, our first speaker is Christopher Dingwall. Our first speaker is Christopher Dingwall, who is a PhD candidate at the University of Chicago, where he is a member of the Object Cultures Project. His studies focus on American cultural history and the history of slavery and emancipation in the Atlantic world. His dissertation, Selling Slavery, Memory, Culture, and the Renewal of America, 1876 to 1920, explores the period of cultural transformation between the ending of slavery and the rise of a mass consumer society. It asks, in particular, how Americans used memories of slavery to grapple with and adjust to the nation's commercial and technological rebirth. Please join me in welcoming Chris Dingwall.
Thank you, Laura, and thank you to all the presenters. It's been really a pleasure. I'm not a design historian, so it's been a nice crash course in design history at this conference, so thank you for having me. So during the winter of 1903, over a slew of letters exchanged between Chicago and Atlanta, the manuscript of The Souls of Black Folk was assembled into a book. In their correspondence, editor Francis G. Brown of Chicago's prestigious A.C. McClurg publishing house, and author W.E.B. Du Bois, then a professor of sociology at Atlanta University, attempted to translate Du Bois's heart-rending collection of essays and sketches about African-American life into a literary commodity. For editor and author alike, what they called the Little Book would require especially careful attention not only to its representation in newspaper advertisements, but also to its physical presence in bookstore displays, in domestic parlors, and in the hands of its readers. Indeed, author and editor jointly handled the seemingly smallest of details, right down to the color of the book's cover. When sending the first batch of proofs to Du Bois in February 1903, Brown sent along two proposed covers, which he said, I have stamped up for the book. So which one would the author prefer? In his reply, Du Bois jotted down his preference. I greatly prefer the black, he wrote. It suits the title best. So in this talk, I'll try to suggest some reasons why Du Bois chose a black cover. Of course, today we know The Souls of Black Folk as a masterpiece, a seminal text for modern American and African American literary style, political thought, and historiography. Yet at the time, its modernity, and let alone its commercial success, were far from certain. My broader project explores, in part, how Du Bois refined his literary presentation of black memory in the graphic idioms of commercial book design, showing him to be a very savvy player in the world of commercial publishing at the turn of the century. Here, however, I want to focus on the seemingly simple decision to decorate his cover black. Ever self-conscious of the presentation of the race and of himself, and here he is, and I'm sorry that the formatting got bumped, but there he is in Paris, looking rather spiffy, which was, of course, the point. I mean, he wanted, this is a man who wanted to look good, and in a way that's hardly immune from the conspicuous consumption of the turn of the century American culture, or international Western culture. But by thinking about his choice of book cover, I think we can also begin to see how book design became a key site where the memory of slavery was shaped more broadly for a highbrow cultural market and American culture generally. So I'll make 2 points. First, that Du Bois's choice of color was not only an assertion of racial identity, a mere visual pun, but rather a choice made with and against conventions of graphic design for books selling memories of slavery at the turn of the century. The second point, and more speculative, is that the content of Du Bois's choice, the pure black color, suggests his sense of the commodity, one not articulated in the text, but essential for his conception of how black souls, say, could redeem and regenerate a country broken by racism and crass materialism. So just to set the stage a little bit about what's going on, at the time, Du Bois was publishing his book and writing his book in 1903. This was the time when Henry Ford founded the Ford Motor Company, for instance, also the year when the United States secured sovereignty over the Panama Canal Zone, and also more grimly, 1903, 84 African-American men were lynched in the South and in the North. So out of essays previously published in such highbrow monthlies like The Atlantic, in addition to newly written essays and sketches, Du Bois addressed The Souls of Black Folk, his first commercial book, to what he saw as a revolution in American life: the rise of monopoly capitalism, the dawn of consumer society, the spread of empire, and the violent consolidation of Jim Crow racism. For Du Bois, then, America was not only a racist country, but also one beholden to, as he said, mammon, in which, quote, the human spirit in this new world has expressed itself in vigor and ingenuity rather than in beauty. And he disparages his rival, Booker T. Washington's program and the New South Creed alike for their emphasis on, quote, material advancement and, quote, the material prosperity over and above matters of beauty and spirit. The villains of the Black Belt, the southern, the Deep South, where African Americans work largely in sharecropping, and where they were vulnerable to racial violence. The villains of this region for Du Bois in his book are not only lynch mobs, but also things like the English Dixie Cotton and Corn Company and the Northern Cottonseed Oil Trust, and in language that he would later come to regret and revise in around 1950, Jewish creditors, who he said were, quote, heirs to the slave baron. So America was becoming a dusty desert, he said, of dollars and smartness, while African Americans, their labor, their freedom, and their culture were being systematically degraded under the banner of progress. Yet it would be these black souls for Du Bois which represented a font of economic and spiritual renewal for the nation. In the final chapter of his book, composed at the very same time that he chose his book cover, he distilled his argument into the remembered music of black slaves, what he called the sorrow songs. Some echo, he wrote, of, quote, a haunting melody from the only American music which has welled up from the black souls in the dark past. So these are, we would call them spirituals, songs like Roll, Jordan, Roll, Go Down Moses, that were sung by slaves and that were being reproduced. So that the souls of black folk, in other words, was as much a critique of modern corporate America as it was an expression of black voice. Indeed, if the industrialization of the South by Northern capital went hand in hand with sharecropping and lynching, Du Bois used a counter-memory of slavery, the sorrow songs, as a way to insist on the humanity of the enslaved and the freed, humanity irreducible to their cash value. Yet, in a curious and unremarked way, it was, his book was also an endorsement for the trade in culture. In a later passage, Du Bois blurred the fine distinction between souls and commodities. In the same final chapter, he theorized a critical difference between the real sorrow song from its imitations by stressing good and bad forms of racial exchange. This had some surprising outcomes, which I'll lay out. So the plantation melodies of Stephen Foster, which were made popular in the burgeoning sheet music market of the 1840s, were, he said, the songs of white America that had been distinctively influenced by slave songs. So Stephen Foster songs would be like Home Sweet Home, Oh Susanna, you know, songs that you wouldn't associate with African-American culture that had become quickly assimilated into white popular culture. On the other hand, quote, the Negro minstrel songs, many of the, quote, gospel hymns, and some of the contemporary coon songs represented mere debasements and imitations. So think about this. Du Bois is lumping minstrel songs, coon songs, racist songs in with gospel hymns meaning songs by working class urban African Americans, religious music certainly, but would have meant for Du Bois and other elite African Americans as something lowbrow. So whatever criteria he had in mind to distinguish the Foster's music from gospel hymns, commodification by the market was not one of them. Indeed, the cultural marketplace as a locus for both influence and imitation was left unspoken. To link the memory of slavery to authentic representations required an original method of blending, which I highlight up here, which seemed to be both a gift from outside the market as well as a product of not only cultural but human commodification. Songs were made by slaves, and they gained the potential to redeem the nation through a mass market. So what we see Du Bois reaching towards, I think, is a sense of how to convey the priceless and immaterial essence of the black soul in a material and marketable form. He stopped short of saying so, of course, but his attention to the graphic presentation of his own book and the color of the color in particular recovers, I want to say, how Du Bois was sensing, if not thinking, about the problem of the cultural commodity. So with the black cover, McClurg and Du Bois expressed their singular conception of the book as a work of high literary quality and political import. So notice again the classical black, the very austere cover, the gilded titling, etc. And also a book outside of typical market conventions, importantly, for other books where black souls are being commodified. For instance, the white Georgian Joel Chandler Harris, his Uncle Remus tales, sold Negro folklore, which made slavery out to be a tranquil pastoral populated by benevolent masters and happy slaves. They were sold with covers which exhibited not so much explicit racism of the minstrel stage, and I'm really glad that the earlier presentation about advertising Germany, if you're here this morning, shows this, that kind of iconography, because I'm not going to show it here, but you can see how different this is. It's just a happy rabbit selling Negro folklore. So it's not really minstrelsy, but more the mythic fantasia of moonlight magnolia, a very comic kind of animalism. So such graphic tropes define the market identity for black authors generally, such as the black author Charles Chestnut and James Carruthers, who used whose books were sold, or they used familiar conventions of literary slave folklore to talk about modern black life. But even though Carruthers updated slave folklore to parody the black underworld of Chicago's metropolis, and here's the cover for his book in 1901, and Chestnut satirized slave folklore to portray a canny slave using his stories to preserve his power on a North Carolina plantation. Here's Chestnut's book. See the rabbits again. There's no rabbits, by the way, in his book. It's a complete invention by his publisher. Their decorated covers hew to the same comic and racist tropes as the Harris cover. With little control over their own design, black authors were pigeonholed by the publishers into literary vogues for Negro folklore and dialect, instead of to the literature which they aspired. So, for a black author at the turn of the century, Du Bois enjoyed an unusual amount of power in crafting the presentation of his book. No wonder that his cover marked a significant difference from typical books of Negro folklore, but also interesting, a difference from McClurg's, his publisher's, own florid series of Southern sketches. It is significant that Du Bois's book was subtitled not only essays but also sketches, alluding to a hot market for regionalist or local colored plantation stories of the Old South. Indeed, Du Bois was not McClurg's only book of sketches with a Southern setting. Samuel Minturn Peck's Alabama Sketches Here was one of 4 released around the same time as Souls between 1900 and 1904, each sharing the same cover design, a title set within a pattern of interweaving ivy. Though as venerable an authority as the novelist Henry James would declare Du Bois's book to be the only Southern book of any distinction published for many a year, the McClurg editor did not attempt to market Du Bois even as a Southern book, even though the bulk of the book is about the South. That the Souls of Black Folk was not considered a part of this series reflected not McClurg's inattention, but their deliberate choice, following the author's desires. Throughout the correspondence with his editor, Du Bois insisted and prevailed that his book be marketed as literature. So surely the black cover speaks to Du Bois's penchant for the classical. In addition to being a vocal advocate for the race, Du Bois cultivated his mien as a Harvard-educated Europhile in the seat. Think back to the early picture of the top hat, the Van Dyke beard. And the stately embellishments on his cover certainly marked a distinction from the very utilitarian red cover of his chief rival Booker T. Washington's Up From Slavery, released only 2 years before. But being literature did not mean losing its foundation for Du Bois, importantly, in the past of slavery and in racial identity. If the pictorial decorations on commercial folklore and sketches represented the difficulty of preserving a counter-memory of slavery in contemporary design, Du Bois would have been very familiar with the bolder attempts to decorate Black life by Black authors. Pauline Hopkins' Contending Forces, for instance, was published by her own Black-run cooperative in Boston and designed by a white commercial artist, R. Emmett Owen. Owen's design here balances typical references to the rural romanticized South, the hand-drawn rustic font, the flowers blossoming on vines, with bold modern touches, the sinuous floating lines breaking the symmetry of the titling into vibrant fields of pure red, pink, and yellow. Owen's graphic design then amplified Hopkins' own literary aesthetic, which couched the story of African-American progress from bondage to modernity into the narrative form of the romance. It blended the romantic historicism, the Floridan foreign design vogue of Art Nouveau. And very quickly, just another example, here's Paul Laurence Dunbar's, another similar kind of florid Art Nouveau kind of foreign kind of style. There's photographs, don't have time to get in there. But to conclude, and to get a little weird for a second, because this is where things get weird, but why not? With this world of Black covers in mind, I'd like to conclude by speculating on Du Bois's own sense of blending Black souls in the cultural commodity. Over and over in the book, Du Bois described the Sorrow Song as a gift of the Black race to modern America, and Du Bois described his book itself as such a gift by focusing his reader's attention on the design of the text and on the texture of the page. As a little book in which he had buried the strange meaning of being Black, he introduces the book, or here as leaves from which would spring a message to tingle the ears of a guilty people. The nation's abiding guilt for slavery and its aftermath was traced by these crooked marks on a fragile leaf. Du Bois described the cultural gifts of the Black folk, as well as his own book, in other words, as a national, indeed a natural relic. They stood prior to and outside of commodity relations tainted by the legacy of slavery. But even though his national imagery suggested Art Nouveau flourishes, he instead suited his Black souls with an austere classicism which was, even more so I'd say, a wash of sheer color. Of course, Du Bois evinced no interest in the work of contemporary painters and book designers like Kandinsky, say, who at the same time were experimenting with pure form and color to transcend the limitations and contingencies of matter. But let me suggest, anyhow, that for Du Bois, pure color was likewise itself the decoration. Instead of seeing an abstract field of color, however, by suiting Black souls, Du Bois used Black color to spiritualize matter with a deep reference to American memory, the redemption of the commodity by Black souls who were once bought and sold. Thank you.
Many thanks for that wonderful talk. And for not minding when I started waving a 2-minute flag at you. So I will now formally and correctly introduce the person whom I had mistakenly begun to introduce before. This is Ertug Altinay, who is a doctoral candidate in the Department of Performance Studies at New York University. And his main area of interest is gender, sexuality, and body politics in Turkey. Ertug's articles appeared in academic journals including Women's Studies Quarterly, Feminist Media Studies, Journal of Women's History, and various edited volumes. His dissertation traces the multiple and shifting discourses of modernization throughout the history of the Republic of Turkey to explore how new subject positions and meaning-making paradigms emerged consequent to changes in both hegemonic and alternative discourses of modernization, and the role of fashion in regulating these processes. And I will say, we've gotten a sneak preview of his images, and they're beautiful. So please help me welcome Ertug.
Thank you very much for this wonderful presentation and accepting me for this exciting event. The formative years of the Republic of Turkey, following its inception in 1923 under the leadership of Mustafa Kemal Atatürk, were characterized by a series of legal, political, and cultural reforms, aiming to construct the country as a modern, secular nation-state with an authentic national essence. In this context, women were conceptualized not only as the builders of a new life, a modern way of living both in the private and the public spheres, but also as the symbols of this new life. For that reason, the transformation of humans' bodies and subjectivities was a key concern for the regime. A particularly important site for these attempts was the Girls' Institute. Established in the academic year 1927-28, these schools combined the basic post-elementary school curriculum with an intense home economics and housework education, including learning to mop. Their primary goal was to create the new female citizen for the new regime. On the one hand, the graduates would be able to participate in the workforce as qualified female labor, as cooks, for example, who know how to cook German-style puff pastry. On the other hand, they would be modern housewives adorned with the scientific knowledge and the European taste to fulfill their social and domestic duties properly, transform their families, and thereby the society. Playing tennis at the school. Since they were believed to provide the education that would prepare the girls for their role as comrades of men in constructing a powerful modern nation state, the institutes were popular among the daughters of the Muslim middle class and the bureaucratic elite. Some institutes also operated in ways similar to colonial institutions, working for the ethnic transformation of Kurdish girls, the major ethnic minority to resist the secular nation-state building program. So they were taking pictures of the girls upon their arrival to the school from their villages, and after they are transformed into proper citizens in the schools. Yeah. The vocational courses offered in the institutes varied, but fashion was always of central importance. The emphasis on fashion is of particular significance in view of the dress reforms, referred to, in fact, as the hat and dress revolution. As argued by Frederick Jameson, the fundamental dynamic of any utopian politics or of any political utopianism will always lie in the dialectic of identity and difference, to the degree to which such a politics aims at imagining and sometimes even at realizing a system radically different from this one. The Kemalist utopia was very much interested in realizing a system that, in certain ways, was radically different from the empire. The body was at the locus of the dialectic of identity and difference. Beginning in 1923, a series of laws progressively limited the use of clothing items that connoted the empire and Islam. In 1925, a resolution passed requiring civil servants to wear Western-style suits and a hat with a brim instead of the fez. The transformation of the bodies of public employees aimed to distinguish the Republic from the Ottoman Empire and the rest of the Middle East, and to create role models for the people. In the same regulation, non-clergymen were prohibited from wearing religious dress. These laws undermined the sources of religious power outside of state control, both by limiting the embodied signifiers of religious power and by providing grounds for executions, arrests, and exiles. So actually 32 people were executed for resisting the dress laws. And many people, including my own great-grandfather, left the country. Arguably to prevent a public outcry, the hat law did not specify anything about female dress. Still, politicians and bureaucrats discouraged women from wearing the headscarf, and particularly the black veil. In fact, some girls' institutes had black veil committees, producing overcoats for women to encourage them to abandon the black veil for a combination of the headscarf and the overcoat, which later formed the basis for tesettür, women's urban Islamic fashion style that gained popularity in Turkey after the 1980s. And here is the First Lady with the Queen. Although Atatürk stated that there was no need to investigate an authentic Turkish dress and the ordinary modern dress, meaning the popular Western fashions of the time, was suitable for the Turkish people, the Girls' Institutes took the initiative and attempted to create a national style. So here we see a gown inspired by a three-piece skirt, and this actually is the three-piece skirt. So they were taking some elements. These attempts reflected the cultural politics of the era, developed in the light of the work of sociologist Ziya Gökalp. A crucial element of Gökalp's thought was his distinction between culture and civilization. For Gökalp, civilization refers to modes of action composed of the traditions, which are created by different ethnic groups and transmitted from one to another. Culture, on the other hand, is composed of the mores of a particular nation and consequently is unique and sui generis. Arguing that Europeans were higher in terms of civilization, Gökalp's recipe for successful social transformation proposed that Turks had to be disciples and imitators of Europe in terms of civilization, while preserving, which in effect meant inventing, an innate national culture. By combining authentic Turkish designs, material and handcraft techniques with modern Western technologies of production and forms of dress, the institutes aimed to create a Turkish national style that would amalgamate Turkish culture with Western civilization. In the creation of this style, the headscarf and the black veil were dismissed as reflective of foreign, particularly Arabic cultural influences, and they were stigmatized as symbols of backwardness and ignorance. Embarking on discovering the true Turkish culture, teachers and students of the institutes collected garments, fabrics, and patterns all over Turkey, and later even formed a pattern museum. So, ignoring the performances and rituals involved in the processes of production and consumption, ethnic differences, and the unity of dress elements, they combined diverse dress elements, now re-signified as Turkish, with Western techniques and forms in an attempt to create an authentic modern Turkish national style. An illustrative example of this style would be this sketch depicting a woman's beach suit and children's beach bibs shorts featured in a 1942-43 yearbook. Both the suit and the shorts were to be made of peasant head kerchiefs. That's how they describe it. In this design, an item that was used in a certain geographical region for specific purposes, not including swimming, was recycled to produce garments immediately associated with the new lifestyle promoted by the regime. At a time when mixed beaches were still new, such fashions could mark these somewhat unfamiliar spaces as the location of a uniquely Turkish modernity, while also guaranteeing the Turkishness of the bodies occupying these spaces and engaging in new everyday performances. Because of the perceived relationship between national identity and the female body, the Girls' Institutes focused primarily on women's fashions. By consuming these fashions, female citizens of the Republic not only distinguished themselves from the subjects of the empire, as well as Western women and Muslim Middle Eastern women, but also distinguished the Republic from its constitutive others. The Girls' Institute's approach to fashion also inspired later generations of Turkish haute couture designers, including Zuhal Yorgancıoğlu, who in fact was a graduate of Izmir Girls' Institute, Vural Gökçaylı, Cemil İpekçi, and Dilek Hanif. In their attempts to build collections that would represent Turkish national identity, these designers have followed the footsteps of the institutes. In fact, some of them commissioned the institute workshops to produce their collections. Embodying a Turkish modernity with the designs they produced, teachers and students of the Girls' Institute started organizing the first fashion shows in the country in the 1930s. The schools also served as haute couture fashion houses, which was particularly important in the capital Ankara, where women from the political and diplomatic elite had difficulty finding high-quality fashions in the still provincial city. However, it would be difficult to argue that the sole purpose of the shows was commercial. Particularly in their early years, the fashion shows were the showcases of the institutes, depicting their power in transforming women. Presented as the ideal female citizens in the shows, the graduates became known and admired by the community in which the institute was located. As women's social duties and responsibilities expanded, desirable femininity came to be defined not so much by the naked body, but the properly clothed and disciplined body. Hence, the fashion shows also replaced the traditional baths as a site where women could view potential daughters-in-law. And also, in some cases, even young teachers benefited from that. I know that in one certain case, in I think 40s or 50s, the prime minister tried to be a matchmaker for a teacher, although it did not work. Although there was competition not only among teachers and students, but also between the workshops in each institute, as well as between the institutes themselves, these power conflicts were largely hidden in the shows. Neither in the yearly shows organized at every school at the end of each academic year, nor in the larger shows held at exhibition centers where multiple institutes collaborated. The teacher, workshop, or school that prepared each design would not be revealed. Thus, the image of the designer as autonomous individual and independent creator was sacrificed in the name of collective identity. Instead of the creations of individual designers who happened to be affiliated with an institution, the institute style emerged, at least for the duration of the shows, as part of the new Turkish culture, created by the people for the people. The teachers and students, on the other hand, learned to derive pleasure and pride via their collective identification with the institutes, while still maintaining a sense of ownership. Thus, the fashion shows emerged as a lived experience of the romance of community inherent to the nation-state project. At most girls' institutes, fashion shows were yearly events organized at the end of each school year. In Beyoğlu Girls' Maturation Institute, the major institute in Istanbul, established in 1945 as a postgraduate institution, the shows were held regularly. In time, the fashion shows in Ankara and Istanbul even gained a diplomatic aspect, as they were organized in honor of foreign intellectuals and political dignitaries visiting the country. And those figures actually included Dwight Eisenhower, Shah Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, Queen Elizabeth II, and Joseph Broz Tito. In and through these shows, young Turkish women emerged as modern, secular, emancipated subjects, attesting to the country's modernity. So here we see Sophia Loren visiting a girls' institute, for whatever reason. Featuring prime examples of sartorial handcrafts combined with delicate ornaments and high-quality fabrics, the dresses also attested to, or rather participated in the construction of, an authentic and valuable Turkish culture that was perfectly compatible with Western civilization and lifestyle. In 1954, Beyoğlu Girls Maturation Institute participated in the Developing Turkey exhibition, which I believe connects to the following talk. With this event, students and teachers, together with performers and journalists, organized fashion shows in the United States, Cuba, Portugal, Spain, and Morocco. This was the first Turkish diplomatic fashion show to be staged abroad. A number of elements inherent to the nature of the fashion show as a genre allowed it to address to the desires of changing governments. The power of nationalism across the political spectrum in Turkey, deeming promoting Turkish culture, whatever that is, a desirable goal in cultural diplomacy. The politically safe image of the fashion show as a performance genre, as opposed to, let's say, theater. The comparatively low budget and the powerful spectacle. Hence, these events have continued to this day. So this is, again, from the same show in 1954. This is mid-90s, a show in Pakistan. And this is more today. Although little has changed in the basic aesthetic strategies characterizing the Institute's style, its politics have shifted under the current, socially conservative and economically neoliberal government of the Justice and Development Party, where neo-Ottomanism saturates the mainstream politics as well as the social imaginary of the people. In this context, a fashion style, as well as the accompanying performance genre that emerged within the secular modernist utopia of the Kemalist revolution, came to be resignified as the embodiment of a utopian nostalgia about Islam and the golden age of the empire. It is now within this political framework that the institutes organize fashion shows all around the world, from Bahrain to New York. Since they have already lost their significance as fashion houses after the 1970s, however, it is not the institutes, but the haute couture designers who cater to the demand for self-orientalist fashion in Turkey, a demand particularly popular among the country's new Islamist political and business elite. These political developments have also created curious dynamics and unexpected alliances in Turkey's fashion scene, as in the case of gay socialist designer Cemil İpekçi, whom we see here self-orientalizing, self-Ottomanizing, starting publicly self-identify as a conservative Muslim gay while he embarked on establishing his image as the poster child of the government. As capital rapidly changed hands and Turkey's new elites started to claim their class privileges, not only new allies like İpekçi, but even staunch secularists like Vural Gökçaylı ended up providing their services to a new clientele. This political atmosphere also created new star designers like Rabia Yalcin. A covered woman of urban middle-class background, Yalcin claims that the principles of modesty and frugality associated with Islam are nothing but Jewish conspiracy, and caters to the desires and aspirations of the urban Islamic elite with her glamorous style, characterized by versatility. Thus, a design strategy that emerged in the context of a secular modernization and nation-building program has gained new meanings, and it continues to produce new bodies and subjectivities in contemporary Turkey. Thank you very much.
Such wonderful stuff. It's delightful. Thank you. And I did promise good images, and you got them. So let me just find, here it is, NYC. Okay. I'm not sure if that's, I will let you, oh, what did we say? Toggle L? There we go. Okay. So the final speaker in today's panel is Kasia Jezowska. She is a MPhil PhD student at the History of Design at the Royal College of Art in London. Her professional interests focus on the intersection of design history, exhibition design, and curatorial practices. Her paper this afternoon is entitled Design Exhibitions and Exhibition Designs, Representing Poland Between 1945 and 1975.
Hello, very nice to be here, and thank you for inviting me. So as the title says, my research focuses on exhibition design that was mainly conceived for exhibitions presenting goods, daily goods such as furniture, domestic appliances, sometimes fashion, and how these two disciplines, discipline of making of the exhibition and product design, work together and support the revolutionary concept of so-called modernity that emerged in Eastern Bloc, Poland included, some months after Stalin's death in March 1953. And as we've heard the previous talk, I found quite a lot of similarities between these modernity concepts supported by government. So we are in Poland a couple years later, but the concept is very similar. Poland was presented at quite a lot of international trade fairs, industrial exhibitions, or sometimes in art galleries as Polish stands, separate pavilions. This one is New Delhi. Displays. This one is in Izmir. And or model living interiors. Here is the cutting from one of the magazine, one of the newspaper in Poland, which is saying, which presents the cubicle with the modern interior, very sleek, very small as it was, but furnished in a way that it was impossible at that time, which I'm gonna to speak about later. What's interesting is also the headline, which saying how we could live if, and this notion, what if, hangs above all the exhibitions that I'm going to talk about today. As I've said, this exhibition aimed to illustrate progress and prosperity. However, what was showcased by no means reflected the status quo. Models, prototypes, and images of goods that were never to be produced were displayed in settings arranged by architects, artists, graphic designers, who normally had limited opportunities to realize their innovative concept in a large scale in disciplines that they were originally trained. In my paper, I will present a very initial research into the use of images, mainly photographical, in a post-war Polish exhibition design that were presented both at home and abroad. And to give you a little bit of background, how the situation looked like in Poland after Second World War or at the very beginning of the 50s, I will read you a very, very short chapter of the book I've recently came across. He took the watch and examined it. The strap broke like a dry leaf between his fingers into small brittle fragments. The face of the watch looked all right, but the hands weren't moving. It doesn't run, Charlotte explained. I stood in the line half an hour for this, and it's just a blob. This is a fragment of a short story novel by science fiction writer Philip K. Dick entitled Pay for the Printer, published for the very first time in 1956 in London. The story takes place in post-war world, somewhere, in which barely any everyday goods, clothes, homes, or personal objects survived the traumatic disaster, which is not described at all. An alien species known as Bildungs have the ability to replicate items identically, although the copies not only last for a short time. When these machines become decrypted, the forgotten skill of creating things from raw materials with simple tools is introduced by a hero who had lived in a pre-war war. And the image that I'm showing you now, a little bit too early, that it's supposed to be, refers to the second fragment, because I think that there is a kind of uncanny similarity between the fragment that I've just read and a note from a diary by Leopold Tyrmand on the picture, journalist, author, and an eager propagator of jazz music in post-war Warsaw, who, by the way, around 1966 moved to London, where his texts were published in New Yorker and other magazines. So Tyrmand, being still in Poland on March 17, 1954, writes, "My comp had got broken. I brought a new one in a representative state-owned drugstore. This morning I tried to use it. I seriously wounded my skin on my head. I plugged my skull with bleeding furrows of long and consistent scratches. I look at the comp once more. At first sight, it was an ordinary, not so bad comp. Quite nice, one could even say. Plastic willow green. It cost 8 Polish zloty, which is more than a dinner at the Writers' Club, with the difference that you can eat the dinner after all. Meanwhile, you cannot brush your hair with the comb." So this describes somehow the situation of the commodity, actually the market in Poland around 50s. And I find that Pay for the Printer, the first science fiction novel that I wrote, might be read as an unintentional metaphor of Polish post-war scarcity. Also, similarly to the situation described in the story, craft and genuine skills of making things by hand from natural materials were revived in Poland. Philip K. Dick's short story might be read also in another way, in relation to reality, where goods were replaced by their images. As Michel Camille puts it, the horror in the story is that the objects are, of course, not the real things, but simulacra. The world has been increasingly removed from the model and made from copies of copies. Things start to lose their reality, end of quote. And I think that to some extent it depicts the process behind organizing displays in Poland, in Polish industrial design, in the post-war period. As I said before, models which were not implemented to the production, prototypes that were not intended by the industry to be used, and photographical reproductions of things were used to represent the non-existing. And the quote from David Crowley from the Cold War Modern Catalog exhibition that took place at the V&A Museum in 2008 is particularly relevant here. And a good illustration of how important exhibition design was, and why I'm gonna to speak about that and further research in my PhD dissertation, is this case study, is the exhibition which was organized in 25th anniversary of Polish People's Republic. I will gonna to show you a very short clip. Sorry for the quality. And this is the fragment of the Chronicles of Moscow Chronicles that represent the opening of the exhibition. But what I find really interesting in this short video, sorry for the lack of sound, is that the exhibition is not really about artifacts. The exhibition is not really about aesthetic values, and even it's not about commodities, but it's all about politics. And to all of you who knows this kitchen debate from 1957 when Khrushchev and Nixon met together at the first, it's very, very similar situation. So in summer 1969, a retrospective of Polish design celebrating the anniversary of the new country was presented on the grounds of the exhibition of achievements of the national economy in Moscow. It was composed of 6 thematic displays that featured ceramic and glass, textile, furniture, industrial and interior design, and exhibition design as one of the design disciplines that was presented. And originally the show was presented in Poland in 6 separate cities and associated with that were associated with a particular branch of the industry. So yeah. So a display of industrial and artistic textile was presented in Łódź that has been the main textile production center since the 19th century, called Polish Manchester. Poznań, the wooden and furniture hub, hosted an exhibition of furniture. Wrocław, having pioneered the glass design department within the Art Academy, presented the glass and ceramic exhibition. A little bit more ambiguous was a selection of Gdańsk and Lublin for presenting interior design and industrial design shows respectively. Anyway, in Moscow, all these shows were assembled into one big exhibition presented under the title Man and His House in the industrial part of the fairs. And here are some images how the exhibition looked like. I really like this one in spite of very bad quality because of the colors and the way the space have been arranged. And here, more classical one. And one part of the Jubilee exhibition was excluded from the main show and was presented separately in the Pavilion of Culture. The name of the show, which was excluded from the main exposition, was Designing Exhibition and Mass Event, so it was a kind of meta exhibition. And it was originally presented between 12 and 28 of May in 1969, so the same year, in Warsaw, in the Zachęta Gallery that you can see here, and organized in partnership with the Association of Polish Artists Interior Design Section and the Bureau of Cooperation with Consumers Opinion, which is very interesting organization, but I cannot explain a little more here or what we're dealing with. So the choice of the Polish exhibition venue was not casual. The gallery was one of the most prominent contemporary exhibition space of that time in Warsaw. It was also the location of Central Bureau of Art and Exhibitions, an official institution that organized exhibitions and coordinated artistic activity of local branches within the whole country. It also was responsible of sending the exhibitions abroad. Being subordinated to the Ministry of Culture and Art, the Bureau was also responsible for implementing and later programming exhibitions at home and abroad that were included in the central plan of artistic events. Both the catalogue and edited volume published for the national exhibitions together, where they were presented together, contain photographs with previous exhibitions views, including those presented at the beginning of my slideshow, rather than actual arrangement in Zachęta or in Moscow venues. Also, the archives of the bureau of the main bureau of the exhibitions do not hold any photographs of this exhibition design, which normally used to be documented. Press reviews reported about the use of models, plans, and unsuccessful attempt to introduce epidiascope projected images. Black and white photographs of expositions were presented quite casually on metal cranes designed by Julian Pauka, originally graphic designer, especially for this exhibition. And here what you see is not the photo from the actual exhibition in Warsaw, but it's similar construction that designed by the same designer that has been used in an ocean liner battery several years before. So this meta exhibition failed to give the right impression of Polish accomplishment in the field of the exhibition design, as reviewers noted. However, it was a very interesting attempt to prize exhibition design as an important part of overall design achievement. And it also provokes the notion of mise en abîme, an image within an image, which has been mentioned in the presentations yesterday. And to unveil that notion, I would use the theory of photography, which provides an interesting angle to the analysis of translating objects into images. Oh God, use of photography for the exhibition design has very rich tradition with works of such luminaries as L. Lizycki, Edward Steichen, and Herbert Bayer, which brings the notion of photography used a powerful propaganda tool, which is a grand concept by its own. Some interesting arguments in a close relation to Polish displays come also from Urszula Czartorywska, one of the most prominent authors writing about photography in Poland. In her seminal publication that mapped the artistic adventures of photography, Czartorywska, drawing from history and theory of photography, presented possible functional application of the medium. Photography is seen here by her as the tool to document reality or to enable an artistic expression, but also as a raw material that might be manipulated. Here the photomontages come to compose a new piece of art, one of the ingredients of a final product, which, as Czartorywska explains, might be a poster or packaging, stage or interior design, retail space, or exhibition arrangement. The way the photographical image was used had changed, or rather developed during the time. Just after Second World War, she argues the informational function prevail. So as you see here, where the objects are on the bottom of the shelf are complemented by the images of the process of making them. And here is another image how the actual elements of the building are complemented by the whole structure presented on the photographical image. As she claimed, with the time this function changed, or rather developed, and then photography was rather used as a supplementary sources. Here's one of the exhibitions from '63, designed by Roman Tyślewicz, very well-known graphic designer who used to work in France for Le Figaro. The biggest asset that photography could bring to exhibition design is an image of an item that is certain, exact and mechanical, that in a way testify that the item exists somewhere, which is very interesting notion given that the product were never produced. Meanwhile, the medium remains transparent. Czartorywska says, first and foremost, the photography is here perceived as a pane or mirror, or mirror sliver that can only be as important as the view that it contains is interesting, she says. That provokes questions about the character of this procedure and whether an image can render a definite account of the real. And here is another example of the, so I just need to finish. And here is another example, the last one, about using of the detail of the wooden photography of the wood for the exhibition of furniture. And just to sum up, here are two examples of the exhibition of the second exhibition of applied art that was presented in Poland in '63. That was also included in the exhibition in Moscow and Warsaw that I was talking about, where images prevail. And looking at this, especially at this image where on the plinth we've got furniture, or rather models or prototypes of the furniture, but around there is frieze of called analysis, which present good and bad examples of interior design. And I really like this image, and would not use this to say definitely that images were more important and brought more attention of the viewers than the actual product, but definitely it characterized how complex the situation, the relation between images and product really was. And this is finished, and only using the situation, if you by any chance in London at the end of May, and you're interested in the concept of social modernity and how design was used in socialist countries, just please join us at the Royal College of Art.